The spit hung in the air for what felt like an eternity, not flying, not falling, just suspended there between arrogance and consequence, between a boy who had never been told no and a woman who had heard it her entire life. When it finally landed on Ruth Calloway's cheek, sliding slowly down toward her worn apron, the Sycamore Diner didn't just go quiet. It went silent in the way a forest goes silent before a storm. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The kind that tells you something fundamental has shifted in the world. Table 9 had been watching. 10 men, 10 leather vests, 10 sets of eyes that had seen things most people only have nightmares about. They had been coming to this diner every other Thursday for 20 years. Same table, same order, same quiet respect for the woman who always remembered how they took their coffee. But on this particular morning, in this particular moment, coincidence became fate. And Griffin Ashford III was about to learn that in this diner on this day, he had picked the wrong woman to humiliate, because those 10 men just made it their business. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Every war has a beginning. Every battle has a first shot. And this story started 22 hours before that spit left Griffin's mouth. It started the way Ruth Calloway's days had started for the last 31 years. In darkness, in silence, in the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix anymore. 5 in the morning and the alarm hadn't even sounded yet. Ruth's eyes opened on their own the way they always did these days. Her body knew the rhythm better than any clock. 62 years of living will do that to a person. Teach you that rest is a luxury. That morning comes whether you're ready or not. She lay there for a moment in the pre-dawn dark of her small house on Maple Street in Millbrook, Montana. The kind of house that used to be called a starter home back when people believed you started somewhere and moved up. Ruth had started here 38 years ago with her husband, Harold. They were going to move up, going to get that place with the big yard and the porch swing where Harold could sit and watch the sunset over the mountains he'd loved since childhood. Then Harold died, and starter homes become forever homes real quick when you're raising a granddaughter on a waitress's salary. The floorboards creaked as Ruth swung her legs out of bed. Every morning, same creak, same sharp reminder in her knees and hips that the body keeps score even when the spirit refuses to quit. The arthritis had been getting worse. The prescription bottles on her nightstand told that story, 2 of them empty, 1 with 3 pills left. The insurance had lapsed again last month. Something about paperwork, always paperwork. She'd buy more when she could. Until then, there was ibuprofen and stubbornness. Ruth moved through her morning routine in near darkness, muscle memory guiding her hands. Coffee first. Always coffee. The cheap kind that comes in a red can because when you've been drinking it for 40 years, you stop tasting the difference. While it percolated, she laid out Lily's clothes for school. 8 years old, 2nd grade, smart as a whip and twice as stubborn as her grandmother. The child was still asleep down the hall, the only grandchild Ruth had left. The only piece of her son Nathan that wasn't sitting in a prison cell upstate. Don't think about Nathan. Not this early, not when you need to get through a shift, but the mind wanders where it wants, doesn't it? And Ruth's mind wandered to the framed photo on the mantel. Nathan in his high school football uniform. Bright smile, bright future. Before the pills, before the arrest, before he became another statistic in a crisis nobody seems able to stop. Lily stirred as Ruth cracked eggs into a pan. Grandma, small voice, sleep thick, morning baby girl. You got another hour, go back to sleep. Is Daddy coming home soon? The egg sizzled. Ruth's hand didn't shake, couldn't let it shake. Not for this question, not for the 100th time she'd answered it. Soon, honey. He's getting better. You just focus on school. Okay, Grandma, soon. That word doing a lot of heavy lifting. Nathan had 4 more years on his sentence. 4 more years of Lily asking. 4 more years of Ruth lying. But sometimes love looks like a lie that gets a child through the night. Ruth watched Lily curl back into her blanket's thumb, finding her mouth the way it always did when she was worried. 8 years old and already carrying the things an 8-year-old shouldn't have to carry. Already learning that the world doesn't always give you what you need. Already understanding somewhere deep in that small body that normal was something that happened to other families. Ruth cleaned the kitchen, packed Lily's lunch, turkey sandwich, apple slices, a note that said, "I love you, star girl," in purple marker. She'd been writing those notes every school day for 3 years. Small kindnesses. They add up. They have to add up, because if they don't, then what's the point of any of it? She checked the mailbox on her way out. Two bills, a credit card offer she'd throw away, and a letter from the state correctional facility. Nathan's handwriting on the envelope. She didn't open it. Couldn't. Not this morning. She tucked it into her purse beside the ibuprofen and the bus schedule she kept as backup for when the car finally died for good. The neighbor's porch light was on. Mrs. Kemper, 79 years old, widowed. She'd watched Lily until the school bus came at 7:45. Had been doing it for 2 years without asking for a dime. Just a plate of cookies at Christmas and the knowledge that she was needed. That's how Millbrook worked. People took care of each other because nobody else was going to. 6:30 and Ruth's 1998 Honda Civic coughed to life in the driveway. Check engine light glowing like it had been for the past 8 months. The mechanic said it was the catalytic converter, said it would be about $1,200 to fix. Ruth said she'd think about it. She'd been thinking about it for 8 months. The drive to Sycamore Diner took 11 minutes through the sleeping streets of Millbrook, Montana. Population 4,200. The kind of town where everybody knows your name and half of them know your business. Where the biggest employer is the lumber mill on the north side and the biggest dream is getting out. Ruth had stopped dreaming about getting out somewhere around 1985. Now she dreams smaller. Lily's college fund, the orthodontist bill. Honest? Making it through another winter without the furnace dying. Sycamore Diner sat on the corner of Main and Fifth. Single story, red brick, neon sign that said "Eat" in letters that had been buzzing since Reagan was president. The windows were wide and low, the kind that let in the morning light and gave the whole place a warm amber glow when the sun hit right. Inside, 12 booths with red vinyl seats worn smooth by decades of regulars. A long counter with 9 stools. A jukebox in the corner that still played Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline, If You Fed It Quarters. Photographs on the walls. Black and white mostly. Millbrook in the 40s. The lumber mill, the high school football team from 1963. Bud in his Marine dress uniform, young and sharp, and full of the kind of certainty that only youth in the Corps can give you. This place was a museum of a town that was slowly disappearing, and Ruth was its longest-serving exhibit. The parking lot was empty except for Bud Tennyson's pickup truck. Bud owned the place. 77 years old. Former Marine. The kind of man who said Semper Fi unironically and meant every syllable. Ruth had been working for Bud for 31 years. Longer than some marriages. Longer than most careers. He'd hired her in 1995 when she was 31 and desperate and willing to work any shift nobody else wanted. Over 3 decades later, she was still working those shifts. The back door was unlocked. Always was. Bud believed locks kept out honest people and annoyed dishonest ones. Morning, Ruthie. Bud's voice from the kitchen. Gravel and cigarettes, though he'd quit smoking 15 years ago. Some things leave a mark. Morning, Bud. Coffee's on. You're a saint. Just a man who knows you don't mess with a woman before she's had her caffeine. The diner smelled like it always did. Coffee and bacon grease and something else. Something Ruth could never quite name. Possibility, maybe. Or just nostalgia for a time when diners like this meant something more than cheap food and cheaper coffee. She moved through her opening routine like a dancer who'd performed the same piece 10,000 times. Filled the napkin dispensers, checked the salt and pepper shakers, wiped down the counters, flipped the sign from closed to open. Every movement practiced, every step economical. Ruth had learned a long time ago that efficiency was survival. Wasted motion meant wasted energy. Wasted energy meant getting home later. Getting home later meant less time with Lily. By 7, the first regular walked through the door. Walter Finch, retired postal worker, 73 years old, sat at the counter, same stool every single morning but for 12 years. Ruth was pouring his coffee before he sat down. Morning, Walt, usual. He nodded, didn't need to say it. 2 eggs over easy, bacon, wheat toast, orange juice. Some conversations you have so many times they become shorthand. Become silence with understanding. That's what Ruth loved about this job, if she was being honest. Not the pay, which was terrible. Not the hours, which were worse. But the routine, the knowing, the way certain customers became fixtures, became family almost. The way she could pour coffee and know she'd made someone's morning just a little bit better. Small victories. That's all life was after a certain age. String enough of them together and you called it a good day. 7:15 and the rumble started. Low at first, distant, like thunder rolling across the Montana plains though the sky was clear and blue. Then it grew, deeper, closer, the kind of sound you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. Walter Finch looked up from his newspaper. Bud stepped out from the kitchen. Ruth set down the coffee pot. Through the front windows they appeared. 10 motorcycles, Harley Davidsons every one, chrome catching the early morning sun like mirrors reflecting fire. They rolled into the parking lot in formation. Not aggressive, not chaotic, disciplined, military precise. The Iron Brotherhood. That's what they called themselves. The patch on their vest told a story if you knew how to read it. An iron fist clenched around a gavel. The words stitched beneath. Protect those who serve. The man who dismounted first was Garrett Holden, 61 years old, silver threading through his beard like wisdom earning its place. Eyes that had seen jungles and deserts and things no man should have to carry. Eyes that still looked for the good in things even when the world made that harder every year. They called him Hammer. Not because he was violent. Garrett Holden hadn't thrown a punch in anger in over 2 decades. They called him Hammer because he was solid, unmovable, the kind of man who drove stakes into the ground and built foundations that lasted. Behind him, 9 others swung off their bikes. Boone Prescott, 59. They called him Wrench. Owned 3 auto shops across the state. Hands that could rebuild an engine blindfolded and had held his daughter while she died of leukemia at 17. Colton Webb, 60, doc to anyone who knew him. Former Army medic. The kind of man who'd seen enough blood that the sight of it didn't faze him anymore, but the waste of it made him angry. Harlan Briggs, 58, shepherd, retired Methodist minister. Still preached sometimes at the VA hospital. Still believed in redemption even when redemption seemed in short supply. There was Flint Hargrove, 62, ran a ranch outside of town. Hands like leather from 30 years of fence lines and cattle. Voice so quiet you had to lean in to hear him, but when Flint spoke, people listened because Flint only spoke when it mattered. There was Odell Banks, 57, the youngest of the 10, former Navy. Built like a refrigerator and gentle as a sunrise. Taught Sunday school at the Baptist church and coached Little League baseball and had once carried a wounded Marine 3 miles through hostile territory because that's what you did. Each of them had a story. Each of them carried scars, some visible, some buried so deep they only surfaced at 3 in the morning when the house was quiet and the memories came calling. But they'd found each other, found purpose, found a way to turn their pain into protection. 7 others, all between 55 and 65. All veterans, all men who'd signed up to serve their country in different wars, different decades for different reasons. But they'd all come back changed. Come back understanding that the real battle wasn't over there. It was right here, in diners like this, in moments like these, in the spaces where power meets powerlessness and somebody has to choose which side they're on. They filed into Sycamore Diner with the easy familiarity of men who'd ridden together for decades. Men who'd bled together, buried friends together, built something together that was bigger than themselves. Table 9, always Table 9. It had become their spot over 20 years of Thursday morning breakfasts. The way certain people claim certain pews in church, sacred almost. Ruth appeared with a coffee pot and 10 cups balanced on a tray. That same warm smile she gave Walter Finch. The same one she gave every customer who walked through that door. Morning, gentlemen, right on time. Garrett nodded, studying her face for just a moment longer than necessary. He noticed something in Ruth's eyes that morning. A weariness he recognized. A heaviness he'd seen before in people who were carrying more than they should have to. He'd seen it in his mother's eyes once. The Brotherhood had a rule, one they'd lived by for 30 years. One that Garrett had written himself after Dolores Holden put a gun to her head in 1978. Watch how people treat service workers. It tells you everything you need to know about a person's character. Ruth started pouring coffee. Garrett watched the way her hands moved. Practiced. Efficient. The slight tremor in her right hand when she thought nobody was looking. The way she winced when she bent to set Doc's cup down. The way she smiled through what was clearly pain. "You doing all right, Ruthie?" Doc's voice. Quiet, concerned. "Oh, you know me, Doc. Can't complain." "That doesn't answer my question." Ruth's smile widened, became armor. "I'm good." "Really? You boys want your usual?" Garrett watched the exchange, filed it away. Something was wrong, maybe nothing serious, maybe just life being life. But something. The Iron Brotherhood had another rule. When you see something, you do something. No exceptions, no excuses. They've been coming to this diner for 20 years specifically because of Ruth Calloway. Because she was what they'd all been fighting for in their own way. A woman who showed up, who worked hard, who treated people with dignity even when dignity didn't pay the bills. She represented something. Someone worth protecting, worth honoring, worth standing up for when the moment came. Garrett Holden had made a promise to himself 48 years ago, after watching his mother cry, after finding her body, after burying her with the knowledge that he could have done something, should have done something. He'd been 13 years old sitting at a restaurant table, watching his mother Dolores serve a man in an expensive suit. Watching that man treat her like she was nothing, like she was invisible, like she was an inconvenience to his morning. The man had grabbed her wrist when the coffee came too slow, had called her things a 13-year-old boy shouldn't have to hear, said to his mother. Dolores had tried to press charges afterward. Assault. Simple as that. But the man had a lawyer, a young lawyer named Lowell Ashford, 23 years old and already razor sharp. Ashford destroyed Dolores on the stand, made her look like a liar seeking attention, made the jury believe the bruises on her wrist came from somewhere else, got his client off on a technicality. 2 weeks after losing that case, Dolores Holden killed herself, left a 13-year-old boy standing in an empty house with a sound he'd never forget, the sound of silence after a gunshot, the sound of a world rearranging itself around an absence that would never be filled. Garrett found her. That's the part people don't talk about. The part that doesn't make it into the newspaper obituary or the funeral program. A 13-year-old boy walking home from school, backpack over one shoulder, thinking about baseball practice, opening the front door to the smell of copper and gun smoke, and the end of everything he'd ever known. He didn't scream. That's what he remembered most. He didn't scream because screaming meant it was real. And if he stayed quiet, if he just stood there long enough, maybe time would reverse itself and his mother would come walking out of the kitchen with that tired smile and say, "Supper's almost ready. Baby, wash your hands." Time didn't reverse. It never does. It just kept moving forward, dragging Garrett with it through foster homes and anger, and the kind of grief that turns a boy into something harder than a boy should have to be. He joined the Army at 18, not because he loved his country, though he grew to, because he needed structure, needed discipline, needed someone to tell him where to stand and what to do, because the alternative was standing in that doorway forever frozen useless, while the person he loved most in the world bled out on the kitchen floor. Garrett built the Iron Brotherhood on that silence. Recruited men who understood it, men who'd known their own versions of powerlessness and had decided the way soldiers decide things, that they would never stand by while it happened to someone else. The promise was simple: protect those who can't protect themselves. And on this Thursday morning at 7:45, the moment was about to arrive. The Mercedes pulled into the parking lot like it owned the place, or like it was disappointed it didn't. Sleek, black, the kind of expensive that whispers instead of shouts. It angled across two parking spaces, diagonal across the painted lines, like those lines were suggestions for people who had to follow rules. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Griffin Ashford III, 19 years old, phone already in hand, designer sunglasses catching the morning sun, clothes that cost more than Ruth made in a month, worn with the casual indifference of someone who'd never checked a price tag. Never had to. Griffin Ashford III, that's what it said on his driver's license, on his credit cards, on the acceptance letter from Georgetown University that currently sat framed in his father's Senate office. His friends called him Griff, the boys from prep school, the guys at the country club, the ones who'd also never heard the word no without it being immediately followed by "just kidding" or "I'll handle it." Griffin Ashford III was the kind of young man who'd been raised to believe the world had been built for him, that other people existed to serve his convenience, that consequences were things that happened to other people. His childhood had been a conveyor belt of privilege. Private tutors, summer homes, a car for his 16th birthday that cost more than Ruth's house. Every want met before it could become a need. Every obstacle removed before it could become a lesson. He'd never waited in a line that wasn't cleared for him, never eaten food that wasn't prepared by someone whose name he didn't bother to learn, never looked at a person in a uniform, any uniform, and seen anything other than the function they served for his comfort. He was about to learn different. Griffin pushed through the door of Sycamore Diner without looking up from his phone, didn't acknowledge the other customers, didn't say good morning, just slid into a booth near the window and continued scrolling, his face illuminated by that blue glow, that anywhere but here light. Ruth approached with a menu and that same patient warmth she'd shown everyone else this morning. Morning, honey. Coffee to start. Griffin didn't look up. His thumb kept scrolling. Social media. Something mindless. Something more important than the human being standing next to him. Is it actually good coffee or that burnt diner garbage? Ruth's smile didn't falter. Couldn't afford to let it falter. Not if she wanted to keep this job. Not if she wanted to make rent this month. It's fresh. Made it 20 minutes ago. Whatever. Black. And I need a few minutes with the menu. He waved his hand. Dismissive. The way you wave away a fly. At table 9, Boone set down his fork a little harder than necessary. Colton's jaw tightened. Harlan's eyes closed for just a second the way they did when he was asking God for patience. Garrett watched, said nothing. But he was watching. Ruth returned with the coffee pot, poured carefully. Griffin took one sip and his face twisted like she'd served him motor oil. This is what you call fresh. How long has this been sitting? Just made it like I said. Can I get you? You know what? Forget it. Just bring me egg whites. Whole wheat toast dry. And I want fresh fruit. Not the canned stuff. Fresh. You understand the difference, right? The words weren't just rude. They were calculated. Each one designed to establish a hierarchy. To remind Ruth that he was up here and she was down there. It was a skill Griffin had perfected over 19 years of practice. The art of making people feel small without ever raising your voice or using obvious slurs. Just a tone, an implication, a question mark placed where it would cut deepest. Ruth wrote down the order. Her hand didn't shake. Couldn't let it shake. I'll get that right out. Make sure you do. I'm kind of in a hurry. He said this while continuing to scroll through his phone, making it clear he wasn't in a hurry at all. He just wanted her to feel like her speed mattered to his convenience. At table 9, Garrett set down his coffee cup. The ceramic clicked against the saucer just once, but in that moment it sounded loud. Boone leaned back in the booth, arms crossed, the way a man crosses his arms when he's keeping his hands busy so they don't do something he might regret. Doc's knuckles had gone white around his fork. They'd seen this before. All of them had. The way certain people treated others when they thought nobody important was watching. The casual cruelty that came from never having to see service workers as human beings. Ruth returned to Griffin's table 12 minutes later with his order. Egg whites, whole wheat toast dry, fresh strawberries and melon on the side. Exactly as he'd requested. Griffin looked at the plate like she'd delivered something scraped off the bottom of a dumpster. He poked at the egg whites with his fork. His face showed theatrical disgust. These look runny. They're scrambled egg whites, just like you. I didn't say scrambled. I wanted them folded like an omelet, but without the yolk. And this toast? He held up the bread like evidence in a trial. This is barely warm. I said I wanted it toasted. Ruth's voice stayed level. Professional. The way it had stayed level for 31 years of difficult customers and impossible demands. You said dry toast. Dry doesn't mean raw. It means toasted without butter. How do you not know that? Do you even know how to do your job? His voice rose just enough, just loud enough, that the couple at the next table glanced over, then quickly looked away. The way people look away from accidents, from ugliness, from things they don't want to be part of. I'm sorry for the confusion. Let me take it back and... No, wait. Griffin picked up his phone, opened the notes app, started typing like he was documenting evidence. Let me spell this out for you, since this seems complicated. I want egg whites folded, not scrambled. I want toast that is actually toasted. Whole wheat, no butter, no jam, nothing on it. I want the fruit on a separate plate, not touching anything else. Do you think you can handle that, or should I draw you a picture? Ruth took the plate. Her hands were steady, but her voice was quieter now. Smaller. I'll get that fixed right away. She walked back to the kitchen. Bud was already remaking the order. He'd heard everything. The whole diner had heard everything. Want me to handle this, Ruthie? No, Bud. I got it. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. Ruth could feel something building in her chest, something that felt like tears but tasted like anger. 31 years of this, 31 years of smiling through it, 31 years of being treated like she was less than human because she brought people food for a living. Usually she could handle it, usually she could let it roll off. But this morning, with the arthritis screaming in her knees and the empty prescription bottles and Lily asking when Daddy was coming home this morning, it was harder. At table 9, Harlan was praying, actually praying, lips moving silently the way he prayed before they rolled into combat zones. Boone had his phone out recording, just in case. Doc was watching Ruth's face when she came back out with the second order, watching the way she was holding herself together with spit and determination. Colton Webb had been a medic for 22 years. He'd seen men hold their guts in with their bare hands and still crack jokes. He'd seen women walk on broken legs to get their children to safety. He knew what barely holding on looked like. Ruth was barely holding on. 15 minutes passed. The kitchen remade Griffin's order exactly to his specifications. Ruth carried it out, set it down, and before she could even step back, Griffin cut into the eggs. His face transformed, theatrical disgust becoming theatrical rage. Are you kidding me right now? His voice cut through the diner's morning chatter like a knife through silk. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to every mouth. This is exactly the same thing you brought me before. Sir, I promise you, we remade everything in exactly. Don't call me sir like that's going to fix your incompetence. Griffin stood up abruptly. Suddenly he was towering over Ruth. 6 feet tall, athletic from tennis lessons and personal trainers, using every inch of that height to make her feel small. Ruth Calloway was 5'4", 62 years old, running on 5 hours of sleep and the weight of a world that hadn't been kind. She'd buried a husband. She'd lost a son to prison. She was raising a child on tips and prayers. And she was standing in front of a boy half her age who was using everything he had, his height, his money, his name, his youth, to make her feel like nothing. This is garbage. Absolute garbage. I don't know what kind of place you think you're running here, but this is unacceptable. He picked up the plate, slammed it down on the table. The crash echoed, eggs scattered, toast broke. Fruit rolled onto the floor. The diner went silent, not quiet, silent. The difference between those two things is a canyon. Ruth stood there frozen. For just a moment, the professional mask slipped. For just a moment, she was just a tired woman being humiliated in front of everyone she'd served for 3 decades. Let you get me what? Another round of food poisoning. Griffin's voice dripped with contempt now. Each word chosen carefully. Each syllable designed to wound. You know what your problem is? People like you think showing up and doing the bare minimum is worth something. This is why you work in a place like this. This is why you'll always work in places like this. You're not good enough for anything better. At table 9, Boone's knuckles went white around his coffee cup. Colton set down his fork with a click that sounded like a gunshot. Harlan stopped praying and started watching. Really watching. Garrett Holden's entire body had gone still. The way a predator goes still before it moves. But Ruth spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. I apologize. I can offer you something else. Or if you'd prefer, there's no charge for... Do you know who my father is? Griffin's voice turned cold now. Dangerous in a different way. The way a threat is dangerous when it's backed by power. Senator Lowell Ashford. One phone call and this whole place shuts down. One phone call and you're out of whatever pathetic job this is. So maybe you should think really carefully about how you handle this next part. He stood there waiting, expecting her to crumble, to apologize more, to make it right. Ruth walked back to the kitchen. Her hands were trembling now, not slightly, visibly. The tremor she'd been hiding all morning was out in the open. Bud saw it, moved to intercept. Ruthie, let me... No, Bud, I got it. It's fine. But her voice cracked on the word fine and everyone heard it. She remade the order herself this time, hands shaking, eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. Because if she cried, she lost. If she cried, Griffin won. If she cried, every difficult customer for the last 31 years won. Every man who'd snapped his fingers at her. Every woman who'd complained about the temperature of the soup. Every teenager who'd left a mess and no tip. Every person who'd looked through her like she was made of glass. Bud stood beside her, didn't say anything, just stood there. The way a Marine stands beside another Marine when the shelling starts. Present, steady, refusing to leave. So she didn't cry. She made the eggs, toasted the bread, plated the fruit, and she walked back out there with her chin up and her shoulders back. Because Ruth Calloway had raised a son alone and buried a husband and was raising a granddaughter now, and she didn't quit. Not ever. She set the plate in front of Griffin, stepped back, waited. He didn't even look at the food, just picked up his fork, took one theatrical bite of the eggs, chewed slowly like he was a food critic at some Michelin-starred restaurant instead of a spoiled child in a small-town diner. Then his face contorted, exaggerated revulsion. "This is disgusting." He dropped the fork. The clatter echoed in the silence. "Absolutely disgusting. How many times do I have to tell you people how to do the most basic thing?" He stood up, used his height, towered over her, and Ruth Calloway, 62 years old, survivor of poverty and grief, and 3 decades of people like Griffin Ashford, felt something inside her start to break. Not her resolve, not her dignity, her hope. Maybe that small kernel of hope that says tomorrow might be better. That says this job has meaning. That says treating people with respect might actually matter in the end. The hope that had gotten her out of bed at 5 this morning. The hope that had made her write "I love you, Stargirl" on Lily's lunch bag. The hope that had kept her pouring coffee for 31 years in a town that was slowly dying, in a job that was slowly killing her. That hope cracking right there in front of everyone. Griffin saw it, saw that crack forming, and like any predator, he went for it. "You know what?" His voice dropped. Quieter, more deliberate, more cruel. "I don't think you're worth the effort." And then he did it. He spit directly in her face, deliberately, with a kind of contempt that turns a human being into a target, a person into an object to be degraded. The diner froze. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every fork paused halfway to every mouth. The coffee maker stopped gurgling. Bud, emerging from the kitchen, stopped mid-step. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. One human being had just decided another human being was beneath basic dignity. And 10 men at table 9 had just witnessed it. Ruth stood there, the spit slowly sliding down her cheek. Her hand came up, automatically reached for her apron to wipe it away, but stopped halfway. Tears formed in her eyes. Not from pain, from humiliation, from the sudden crushing weight of being made invisible and then violated in front of everyone. From knowing she needed this job, needed the tips, needed to smile through this because Lily needed new shoes and the electric bill was due, and she couldn't afford to fight back. The couple at table 3 looked away. The man at the counter stared at his coffee like it held the secrets of the universe. Walter Finch gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles went white. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because this is what powerlessness looks like from the outside. A room full of people who know something terrible just happened and don't know what to do about it. A room full of decent people paralyzed by the sudden appearance of indecency, so casual, so confident that it freezes the air in your lungs. Ruth felt every eye in the room, felt the pity, the outrage, the helplessness, and underneath all of it, the quiet shame of people who wanted to help but didn't know how. So she stood there, spit on her face, silence crushing down around her, and Garrett Holden stood up. The sound of his chair scraping against the linoleum floor cut through the silence like a rifle shot. Not dramatic, not loud, but in that moment it was the only sound in the entire world. Behind him, 9 chairs scraped in near unison. Boone, Colton, Harlan, 6 others, standing up, not moving forward, not threatening, just present. A wall of leather and solidarity. Garrett walked across the floor with a kind of calm that comes from a man who's been in real danger and knows this isn't it. His boots made steady, measured sounds against the linoleum. He wasn't rushing, wasn't posturing, just moving with purpose. The way a man moves when he's made a decision and nothing is going to unmake it. He stopped beside Griffin's table, close enough to be present, not threatening, not aggressive, just there. His voice when it came was low and steady, the voice of a man who'd given orders under fire and expected them to be followed. "You're going to apologize to the lady." Griffin looked up from his phone. Confusion flickered across his face. Then he saw the leather vest, the patches, the silver beard, the eyes that had seen things Griffin couldn't imagine, and something like amusement crossed his features. He actually laughed. "Are you serious right now? You need to step back, old man, before you get yourself in trouble. The only person in trouble here is you, son. That woman deserves an apology, and you're going to give her one." Griffin stood up, puffed his chest, trying to reclaim the height advantage, trying to remember he was supposed to be the one with power here. "You know what I'm calling the police? This is harassment. You're threatening me." He pulled out his phone, waved it like a weapon. "My father is Senator Lowell Ashford, and when he hears about this, you're going to wish you stayed in whatever hole you crawled out of." The Iron Brotherhood didn't move, didn't speak. They didn't have to. For the first time in his 19 years of life, Griffin Ashford III felt what actual consequences might look like. His confidence wavered. His hand with the phone dropped slightly. But pride is a powerful thing, especially in young men who've never had to back down from anything. "You think you scare me? You think some biker gang costume party is going to make me do anything? I don't owe that woman anything. She's a waitress. She screwed up my order 3 times. If anything, she should apologize to me." Garrett took a breath, the kind of breath a teacher takes before explaining something to a student who's not getting it, who might never get it. "But you try anyway because that's what you do. Let me tell you something about respect, son. We don't start trouble. We ride our bikes, we go to work, we take care of our families, but we finish disrespect, especially when it's aimed at people who can't defend themselves without losing everything they have." He gestured toward Ruth. She was still standing there, frozen, the spit now wiped away with her apron, but the stain of it still visible on her cheek, still visible in her eyes. "That woman has more dignity in her exhausted smile than you'll have in your entire life. And you spit on her in front of everyone like she's nothing. She is nothing." The words came out before Griffin could stop them. Automatic, reflexive, the kind of thing you say when you have been raised to believe it so thoroughly you don't even question it anymore. "Then we have a problem." Garrett's tone didn't change, but something in the air shifted. Griffin moved toward the door, trying to end this on his terms, trying to walk away with some shred of control. But as he approached the exit, he found his path blocked. Not aggressively, not threateningly. Boone and Colton were just standing there near the door, existing in the space Griffin needed to occupy. "Excuse me," Griffin's voice tight. They didn't move. Behind the counter, Bud Tennyson picked up the phone. His hand shook slightly as he dialed, but it wasn't the police he was calling. It was someone else. Someone who needed to know his son had just crossed a line there was no coming back from. Griffin turned back to the room. 10 bikers, one waitress still frozen by table 7, a diner full of witnesses, and for the first time in his 19 years, nowhere to run. "Fine. Fine. I apologize." "Okay, Happy." The words came out flat, perfunctory, the kind of apology that means nothing because it costs nothing. Garrett shook his head slowly. "That's not how this works. What do you want from me? I want you to understand what you did. I want you to feel it, and I want you to learn from it." I said, "I'm sorry. Sorry is just a word, son. You don't learn by apologizing. You learn by understanding." The door opened. Senator Lowell Ashford walked in, 56 years old, expensive suit, political smile that died the moment he saw his son surrounded by leather vests and judgment. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice had that senatorial boom, that I'm in charge authority that came from 20 years of people doing what he said because he said it. Garrett turned to face him, and in that moment, recognition flickered across both their faces. They knew each other, or rather, they'd known each other a long time ago, in a different context. 48 years ago, a young lawyer named Lowell Ashford had defended a man accused of assaulting a waitress named Dolores Holden, had gotten him off on a technicality, had destroyed Dolores's credibility on the stand, had made her look like a liar seeking attention. 2 weeks after losing that case, Dolores Holden killed herself. And Garrett Holden had never forgotten the man who made that possible. The universe has a way of settling debts, Senator. Garrett's voice was perfectly neutral. Your son just assaulted one of my friends. That's ridiculous. Griffin would never. He spit in her face. I have video. So do half the people in this diner. Lowell Ashford's political instincts kicked in immediately. Damage control, mitigation, the machinery of power spinning up to protect what needed protecting. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. Griffin apologized to the woman and He already apologized, Senator. Words are cheap. Your son needs to learn what consequences feel like. Are you threatening my son? No, sir. I'm offering him an education. The two men stared at each other. 48 years of history hanging between them. A dead woman neither of them could forget. A debt that had never been paid. Garrett could see it in the senator's eyes. The recognition. The flicker of something that might have been guilt, if guilt were an emotion Lowell Ashford still had access to. The senator remembered Dolores Holden, remembered the case, remembered the young woman on the witness stand who'd cried when he destroyed her testimony, remembered choosing his career over her truth. Some men carry their sins like stones in their pockets. Others leave them by the roadside and keep walking. Lowell Ashford had been walking for 48 years, and in this moment the road had circled back. What do you want? Lowell Ashford's voice was cold now, calculating. 60 days. Your son works here. Full shifts, learns what it means to serve people, learns what Ruth does every single day. At the end of 60 days, we're done. He goes back to his life, but he goes back different. That's absurd. You'll what, Senator, sue us? Go ahead. We've got video of your son assaulting a 62-year-old woman. Wonder how that plays in an election year. Wonder how it plays when I send it to every news outlet in the state. Lowell Ashford's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists, then relaxed. The political calculation running. The risk assessment. The cost-benefit analysis of a man who'd spent 2 decades weighing options and choosing the most advantageous path. Fine. 60 days. But this ends here. No press, no charges. This ends. Garrett nodded once. This ends when your son learns what he needs to learn. Not before, though. Senator Ashford grabbed his son's arm, pulled him toward the door, but before they left, he turned back one more time. You're making a mistake, Holden. I made my mistake 48 years ago, Senator, when I didn't stand up for my mother. I'm not making it again. The door closed behind them. The Mercedes roared to life, pulled out of the parking lot, gravel spitting from expensive tires. The diner stayed silent for another moment, processing, absorbing. Understanding that something fundamental had just shifted, that the 10 men in leather vests had just done what an entire diner full of people had been too afraid, too uncertain, too frozen to do. They'd stood up, they'd said enough. They'd drawn a line in linoleum and diner coffee and told a boy with a senator for a father that his money and his name and his power stopped right here at the edge of a 62-year-old woman's dignity. Then Bud started clapping, slow, deliberate. One man showing respect. Walter Finch joined in, then the couple at table 3, then everyone. A small diner full of regular people showing Ruth Calloway what Griffin Ashford had never understood. That dignity isn't given, it's claimed, and sometimes it's defended. Ruth stood there, tears finally falling, but not from humiliation anymore, from something else, something that felt like being seen, like mattering. Garrett walked over to her, gently, carefully, the way you approach someone who's been hurt. You okay, Ruthie? She nodded. Couldn't speak yet. You didn't deserve that, any of that. Thank you. Barely a whisper. Nothing to thank me for. That's just what family does. And Ruth Calloway, who'd been alone for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to have people stand with her, finally understood. She wasn't alone anymore. The Iron Brotherhood had made her their business. And they didn't quit. Not ever. The morning continued. Orders were taken. Coffee was poured. The rhythm of the diner resumed its familiar beat, though something underneath had changed. Ruth moved through the rest of her shift on autopilot, but her hands were steadier now. Her smile was smaller, more careful, like a bruise that needed protecting. But it was real. At 11:30, when the lunch crowd started trickling in, Doc pulled her aside near the kitchen. "Let me look at your hands, Ruthie. I'm fine, Doc. You keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means." She let him examine her fingers. He saw the swelling, the redness, the way her knuckles had started to curl inward. "You need to see someone about this arthritis, Ruthie. This is getting serious, I know." When the insurance gets sorted, Doc reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a card. "A doctor at the VA clinic. Friend of mine. He'll see you." "No insurance needed." Ruth looked at the card, looked at Doc, felt something warm spread through her chest that had nothing to do with coffee. "Thank you, family Ruthie. That's what we do." But standing in that diner, wiping tears from her face while the morning sun streamed through windows that needed cleaning and the coffee grew cold in cups nobody was drinking, Ruth felt something else stir beneath the gratitude. Something quieter, something that had nothing to do with Griffin Ashford or the brotherhood or the applause that was already fading into the awkward shuffle of people returning to their breakfast. She felt a question forming, one she wouldn't be able to ask for weeks yet, one that would change everything. Because in that moment, as her hands stopped shaking and her breathing steadied, Ruth Calloway remembered something. A detail from years ago, a letter from the Veterans Affairs Office, a number on a form that hadn't made sense at the time, a denial code on Harold's treatment authorization that she'd filed away in a shoebox in her closet because the grief was too fresh and the paperwork too cruel, and she'd had a granddaughter to raise and a life to hold together. Harold had served his country, 11 years in the Army, 2 tours, came home with a cough that wouldn't quit, in a V, a promise that they'd take care of him. And then the letters started coming. Denied. Denied. Under review. Denied. Treatment deemed not cost-effective. Benefits reduced pending administrative review. Harold died of lung cancer in 2011, 57 years old. Died in a hospital bed that should have been paid for by the country he'd bled for. Died while Ruth held his hand and whispered that everything was going to be all right, knowing it wasn't, knowing nothing would ever be all right again. She didn't think about it now. Not consciously, not yet. But the seed was there, planted in the same soil where Griffin Ashford's contempt had tried to take root. And seeds once planted have a way of growing toward the light, even in the darkest soil, especially in the darkest soil. 3 days later, Griffin Ashford III pushed through the back door of Sycamore Diner at 5:45 in the morning, wearing borrowed non-slip shoes that didn't fit quite right and an apron that smelled like someone else's shift. The sky was still dark, the kind of dark that makes you question every decision that led you to this moment. The kind of dark where the only sound is your own breathing and the distant hum of a town that's still sleeping. Griffin had never been awake this early in his life, not voluntarily, not for something that mattered. But here he was, because his father had made it very clear that refusing wasn't an option. Not with an election 8 weeks away. Not with video footage of his son spitting on a 62-year-old woman, potentially 1 click away from going viral. The conversation had been brief, clinical, the way Senator Lowell Ashford handled all problems, like a surgeon removing something unpleasant. "You'll do the 60 days, you'll keep your mouth shut, you'll do whatever they tell you, and when it's over, this never happened. And if I don't want to, then I'll cut you off. Georgetown, the trust fund, the apartment, everything. You think you can survive in the real world, Griffin? You think you can make it without my name and my money? Try it. See how far you get." Griffin didn't try. He'd never had to try at anything. That was the problem, though he didn't know it yet. Bud Tennyson was already in the kitchen. 77 years old and still the first one in. Still firing up the griddle. Still brewing the first pot of coffee like he'd been doing for 40 years. Morning. Bud's voice carried the weight of assessment, measuring, deciding what this boy was made of before the first hour was done. Morning. Griffin's voice carried resentment and exhaustion and something else. Something he didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and not knowing if the ground beneath him was solid. "Ruthie will be here in 15 minutes. She's going to train you. You listen to everything she says. You do everything she tells you. You got questions, you ask. You got attitude, you swallow it. We clear crystal. Good. Coffee's over there. Help yourself. You're going to need it." Griffin poured a cup, tasted it. It was terrible. The same burnt diner garbage he'd complained about 3 days ago. But this morning it was the only caffeine between him and complete collapse. So he drank it. Funny how perspective changes when you're the one who needs something. Ruth arrived at 6 exactly. Same worn Honda Civic coughing into the parking lot. Same careful walk to the back door favoring her left knee. Same quiet efficiency as she tied her apron and checked the dining room setup. She saw Griffin standing by the coffee pot. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a long moment. What do you say to someone who humiliated you? What do you say to someone you humiliated? There's no script for that, no manual, no chapter in the etiquette books that Griffin's mother had shelved in the library of their 12,000 square foot house. Morning, Ruth's voice, professional, careful. The voice of a woman who had decided somewhere in the 3 days between that spit and this sunrise that she would do this job the way she did everything else, with dignity, with competence, without surrender. Morning, Griffin's voice, uncertain, something that might have been shame if he knew what shame felt like. Bud says you're here to learn, so let's get started. No warmth, no coldness, just the voice of a woman who'd been given a bomb and was going to do it. Because that's what Ruth Calloway did. She showed up, she did the work, even when the work meant training the person who'd spit in her face. The first hour was set up. Ruth showed Griffin how to check salt and pepper shakers, how to fill napkin dispensers, how to wipe down tables so they didn't streak, how to arrange the condiments just so, how to check the coffee machines, the ice bin, the syrup dispensers, how to fold silverware into napkins with a single efficient motion that took her 2 seconds and took him 45. Tasks that seem mindless until you realize they had to be done perfectly every single morning before a single customer walked through that door. Until you realize that this invisible labor, this pre-dawn ritual of preparation, was the foundation that held everything else up. Why does it matter which way the ketchup bottle faces? Griffin asked. Not antagonistic, genuinely confused. The confusion of a person encountering a world where small things mattered, where attention to detail wasn't about perfectionism or aesthetics, but about care, about seeing people. Because Mrs. Henderson sits at table 4 every Tuesday and Thursday. She has arthritis in her right hand. If the ketchup bottle faces left, she can grab it easier. Small things matter, Griff. Small kindnesses add up. Griff, she'd called him Griff, not Griffin, not you, like he was a person, like he had a name worth using. It was such a small thing, but it landed somewhere deep, in the place where shame lives next to the first fragile stirrings of something better. By 7, the diner was open. By 7:15, Walter Finch walked through the door and sat at his usual stool. Your turn. Ruth handed Griffin a coffee pot. Go pour Mr. Finch his coffee. Just like that. Just like that. Left hand under the pot, right hand on the handle. Pour smooth. Don't fill it all the way to the top. Leave room for cream. Griffin walked over. The coffee pot felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe his hand was shaking. Maybe both. Morning, Mr. Finch, coffee. Walter looked up, recognized him. Griffin saw it happen, saw the moment this retired postal worker remembered the scene from 3 days ago, saw judgment form and settle like dust on a shelf. You the Ashford boy. Not a question, a statement. Yes, sir. You here to learn, or you here because Daddy made you? Griffin opened his mouth. The automatic lie was right there. The easy answer that would smooth this over. But something stopped him. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the way Ruth was watching from across the counter. Maybe something else entirely. Something that had started cracking 3 days ago and hadn't stopped. Both, I think. Walter studied him for a long moment, then held out his cup. Then let's see if you can pour coffee without making a mess of it. Griffin poured. His hands shook slightly. A few drops hit the saucer, but the cup filled. Walter took a sip. Not bad. You'll get better. It was such a small thing, such a nothing moment. A retired postal worker accepting a cup of coffee from a boy who didn't deserve acceptance. But Griffin felt something shift. This man could have destroyed him, could have made this moment unbearable. Instead, he'd given him a chance. Small kindnesses add up. By 8, the morning rush started, and Griffin Ashford III discovered what hard work actually meant. Not hard like tennis practice, where you had a coach and water breaks and someone telling you you're doing great. Not hard like SAT prep, where the worst consequence was having to take it again. Hard like your feet hurt and your back aches and you've been moving non-stop for 2 hours and there are 4 more hours to go, and you can't sit down because there are people waiting and they don't care that you're tired. Hard like real life. Hard like the life Ruth had been living for 31 years. Table 6 wanted their eggs over easy, but they came out over medium, and Griffin had to walk back to the kitchen and ask Bud to remake them. And Bud didn't say anything, just cracked 2 new eggs and started again. And Griffin felt the weight of wasting food, wasting time, wasting this man's effort. The kind of weight that doesn't show up on a scale but presses down on you all the same. Table 9 ordered hash browns crispy, but Griffin wrote down, "well done." And the kitchen made them too hard. And the customer sent them back with a look that said, "you're incompetent." And Griffin felt his face flush with embarrassment. The heat of being judged and found wanting. A sensation so unfamiliar it took him a moment to even name it. Table 12 wanted decaf. And Griffin poured regular and didn't realize until the woman took a sip and said, "this isn't decaf, honey." And Griffin had to apologize and explain and bring a new cup. And the woman was kind about it. But kindness somehow made it worse because he didn't deserve kindness. Did he by 10? Griffin had spilled coffee on himself, twice dropped a plate of toast, gotten 3 orders wrong, and was seriously considering walking out the back door and never coming back. Ruth appeared beside him at the coffee station. Quiet, steady. "You're doing fine." "I'm doing terrible." "You're doing fine for day one." "Everybody's terrible on day one." "How long did it take you to get good at this?" Ruth smiled, small, sad almost, the smile of a woman who'd earned every line on her face. 31 years. Still learning. She walked away before he could respond, but the words stayed with him. 31 years. This woman had been doing this job longer than he'd been alive, and she was still learning, still trying, still showing up. What the hell had he been doing with his 19 years? The lunch shift came. More customers, more orders, more opportunities to screw up. And Griffin screwed up plenty. But he also started to notice things. The way Ruth moved through the dining room like water. Efficient, purposeful, never wasting a step. The way she remembered everyone's names, everyone's orders, everyone's preferences. The way she smiled at the rude customers with the same warmth she gave the kind ones. Because the smile wasn't about them, it was about her. About choosing kindness even when kindness wasn't returned. That afternoon, between the lunch rush and the quiet hours before dinner, Griffin found himself wiping down table 4. Mrs. Henderson's table. He turned the ketchup bottle so the label faced left. Didn't think about it. Just did it. Ruth saw it from across the room. Didn't say anything. But she noticed. The days ground on, each one a little easier, each one a little harder. Easier because the mechanics improved. Harder because the understanding deepened. Griffin started to learn things that no prep school, no country club, no senator's dinner table had ever taught him. He learned that Ruth took the bus to work now because her car had finally died. That she woke up at 4:30 to make the 5:15 bus. That the bus stop was 7 blocks from her house, and there was no shelter, just a sign and a bench. And when it rained, she stood there and got wet, because that's what you did when you couldn't afford alternatives. He learned about Lily, 8 years old, smart, stubborn, drawing pictures of families with a father in them, even though her father was in a cell upstate. Ruth kept those drawings in her apron pocket, pulled them out sometimes during slow moments, looked at them with an expression that Griffin couldn't name but recognized. The expression of someone holding something precious and fragile and knowing that at any moment it might break. He learned about Nathan, Ruth's son. Not the details, not yet, but the weight of it. The way Ruth's face changed when the phone rang at certain times. The way she'd excuse herself, step into the storage room, talk in whispers, come back with red eyes and steady hands. The discipline of a woman who'd learned to cry where nobody could see and work where everyone could. He learned that Bud Tennyson had served 2 tours overseas, that he'd opened this diner with money from his GI Bill, because he wanted to create a place where everyone was welcome, where service workers were treated with dignity, where the food was honest and the coffee was hot and nobody had to pretend to be something they weren't. He learned that the Iron Brotherhood came every Thursday not just for coffee, but to check on Ruth, to make sure she was okay, to be the family she didn't have anymore. They'd been doing it for 20 years, 20 years of consistency, the kind of loyalty that doesn't announce itself but just exists steady and sure, like the mountains that ringed Millbrook on every side. He learned that the world was full of people who showed up every day and did hard things and never complained. Because complaining was a luxury they couldn't afford. And he learned that he'd been one of the people making their lives harder. By the end of the first week, Griffin had learned how to pour coffee without spilling, how to carry 3 plates at once, how to smile at rude customers even when he wanted to scream. He'd also lost 4 pounds, developed blisters on both heels, and slept deeper than he'd ever slept in his life. The sleep of the genuinely exhausted. The sleep of someone who'd actually used their body for something other than tennis and leisure. Week 2 started the same as week 1. 5:45. Borrowed shoes, Ruth's patient instruction, the morning rush, the mistakes, the small improvements. But on Thursday of week 2, everything changed. The Iron Brotherhood rolled into the parking lot at 7:15. Same as always. 10 motorcycles, same formation, same ritual. They walked into the diner, saw Griffin behind the counter pouring coffee for Walter Finch. Garrett Holden stopped. The 9 men behind him stopped. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Garrett nodded. Once. Small, almost imperceptible. It wasn't approval. It was acknowledgement. You're still here. You're still trying. Morning Hammer, Griffin's voice uncertain but genuine. Morning Griff, coffee ready? Yes, sir. Just made it. Then let's see what you got. Griffin approached table 9 with a coffee pot and 10 cups. His hands didn't shake this time. Or if they did, he controlled it better. He poured for Garrett first, then Boone, then Colton, then Harlan, then the others. Each pour steady, each cup filled just right, left room for cream. When he finished, Boone looked at his coffee, took a sip. Not bad, kid. Not bad at all. It was the first time any of them had acknowledged him as anything other than the enemy. The first time they'd seen him as a person instead of a problem. Thank you, sir. Boone. Call me Boone. We don't do sir around here. Over the next week, something unexpected happened. The Brotherhood started teaching him. Not formally, not obviously, but in the way men who'd lived full lives teach younger men who are just starting to figure things out. Through stories, through example, through the quiet patience of people who remember what it was like to be lost. Boone showed him how to fix the diner's broken ice machine. Taught him that most things that seem complicated are just a matter of patience and the right tools. That knowing how to fix things with your hands gives you a different kind of confidence than knowing how to argue or negotiate or buy your way through problems. See, this, Boone pointed to a loose belt. Whole machines down because of one small part. Life's like that, kid. Small things matter. Take care of the small things. The big things take care of themselves. Colton, the former medic they called Doc, showed him basic first aid. How to wrap an ankle, how to treat a burn, how to stay calm when someone's bleeding. Panic kills more people than injuries. You learn to control your fear. You can save lives. You let your fear control you. You become part of the problem. Harlan, the retired minister they called Shepherd, taught him something different, something harder. You know what repentance is, Griff? They were cleaning up after the lunch shift. Griffin was scrubbing tables. Harlan was sweeping. Saying you're sorry. No, that's apology. Repentance is changing direction. It's not just feeling bad about what you did. It's becoming someone who wouldn't do it again. How do you know when you've changed enough? You don't. You just keep changing, keep trying, keep becoming. That's all any of us can do. But it was Tuesday of week 3 that cracked Griffin open. At 1:30 in the afternoon, a man walked into the diner. Mid-60s, wearing a veteran's cap, moving with the careful stiffness of someone whose body had been through things and remembered every one of them. He looked at Griffin. Recognition flickered. Then something harder. Something that went beyond anger into a territory Griffin had never seen in another person's eyes before. Territory that looked like grief wearing the mask of composure. Ruth saw it, started to move in that direction, but the man held up his hand. I got table 7, Ruthie. I want the boy. Griffin walked over. Something in his chest tightened. He knew this feeling now, the feeling of facing something you'd done and couldn't undo. What can I get you, sir? The man stared at him long enough that Griffin wanted to look away, but he didn't. Couldn't, because looking away would be hiding, and hiding was what the old Griffin did. The Griffin who pretended things didn't happen. The Griffin who let other people clean up his messes. You know who I am? No, sir. Emmett Dawson. You knew my son, Jared. The name hit Griffin like a physical blow. Jared Dawson, sophomore year, the kid who'd tried to join their friend group at Wharton Prep. The kid Griffin had decided wasn't good enough, wasn't cool enough, wasn't wealthy enough. The kid Griffin and his friends had made miserable for 8 months. The texts, the social media posts, the lunch table exile, the party where they'd invited him just to humiliate him in front of everyone. The kid who'd transferred schools. The kid who'd killed himself 18 months ago. Griffin's mouth went dry. Mr. Dawson, I coffee. Black. Pancakes. Bacon. That's what I want. That's what you are going to get me. And you're going to do it with a smile because that's what service workers do. They smile even when they want to scream, even when they want to tell you exactly what they think of you. They smile because it's their job. Emmett's voice was perfectly level, perfectly calm, and absolutely devastating. The voice of a father who had buried his son and carried that burial in every word he spoke and every step he took for 18 months of mornings that shouldn't have been morningless. Yes, sir. Griffin walked to the kitchen. His hands were shaking, really shaking. He gave Bud the order. Bud looked at him, saw something. You all right, kid? That man's son. I knew him. I wasn't good to him. Bud didn't say anything, just started making the pancakes, but his silence felt like judgment. Maybe because it was. The silence of a man who'd served his country and come home and built something honest with his hands and couldn't understand how one person could destroy another for sport. Griffin brought out the food, set it down carefully. Emmett didn't look at it. You remember my boy? Yes, sir. You remember what you did to him? Yes, sir. You know why he killed himself? Griffin couldn't speak, couldn't move. The diner seemed to narrow around him, the sounds fading, the light dimming, just him and this father and the ghost of a boy he'd helped destroy. Depression. That's what the doctor said. Chemical imbalance. Might have happened anyway. But you didn't help, did you? You and your friends, making him feel like he wasn't worth the air he breathed. Mr. Dawson, I'm so don't. Emmett's voice sharp as a blade. Don't apologize. Apologies are words. Words are cheap. You want to make this right? You can't. My son is dead. Nothing makes that right. But you can learn. You can change. You can become someone who doesn't destroy people for entertainment. He picked up his fork, cut into the pancakes, took a bite. These are good. Tell the cook I said so. Griffin stood there, frozen, not knowing if he was dismissed, not knowing what to say, not knowing anything anymore except that the world he'd been living in, the world of privilege and consequence-free cruelty, had been built on a foundation of other people's suffering. Mr. Dawson. Emmett looked up, and something in his eyes had changed. Still hard, still hurt, but something else too. Something that looked like the decision to try by, the decision to believe in something his heart couldn't quite accept, but his son's memory demanded. My son was kind. Even when you weren't, even when nobody was. He believed people could change. I'm not sure I believe that, but I'm here because Jared would have wanted me to give you a chance. So I'm giving you one. Don't waste it. Griffin walked away. Made it to the kitchen, leaned against the wall, felt something breaking inside him. Something that had needed to break for a long time. The shell of entitlement, the armor of indifference. The story he'd been telling himself his entire life, that what he did to other people didn't matter because other people didn't matter. Jared Dawson had mattered to his father, had mattered to whoever had loved him, had mattered to the world in ways Griffin would never know because Griffin had helped erase him from it. Ruth found him there 10 minutes later, leaning against the wall, eyes red, hands clenched. You okay? No. Want to talk about it? I don't deserve to talk about it. Ruth was quiet for a moment. She looked at this boy, this young man who had spit in her face 3 weeks ago, who had called her nothing, who had used his height and his money and his name to make her feel like the floor he was standing on. And she saw something she recognized. She saw Nathan. Before the drugs, before the prison, before the choices that turned a bright-eyed boy into a statistic. She saw the moment where a person stands at the crossroads between who they've been and who they might become, and the ground beneath both paths is shaking. Griff, I don't know what you did before you came here. I don't know what kind of person you were. but I know what kind of person you're choosing to be right now. You're here, you're working, you're trying. That matters. Does it matter if I destroyed someone's life? If I'm part of the reason someone's dead? I don't know. I don't have those answers. But I know you can't change the past. You can only change what you do next. She walked away, left him with that. You can only change what you do next. The afternoon crawled by. Griffin finished his shift at 3. 6 hours of work. It felt like 6 years. Every muscle hurt. His feet were killing him. His pride was somewhere on the floor with the spilled coffee and broken toast. But he came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, because Jared Dawson had believed people could change, and Griffin Ashford owed him at least the attempt. It was the following week, a Wednesday afternoon during the quiet hours between lunch and dinner, when Ruth Calloway did something she hadn't done in 14 years. She opened the shoebox. It sat on the top shelf of her bedroom closet behind a stack of folded blankets and a hat box from a wedding she barely remembered attending. The box was ordinary, brown cardboard, a brand of shoes she couldn't afford anymore. But what it held was anything but ordinary. 14 years of Harold's paperwork, a correspondence, medical records, insurance forms, denial letters, appeal letters, denial letters again. The bureaucratic chronicle of a man who had served his country and been abandoned by it. Document by document, form by form, until the form stopped because Harold stopped, because the cancer took what the system had already decided wasn't worth saving. Ruth hadn't opened this box since the month after Harold's funeral. She'd shoved it up there and told herself she'd deal with it later. Later became a year. A year became 5. 5 became 14. And the box sat there collecting dust, holding secrets she hadn't been ready to face. But something had changed. It had started the morning Griffin spit on her. Not the spit itself, though, that had cracked something open too. It was afterward. Standing in the kitchen, hands shaking, making eggs for the 3rd time. Something had stirred in her memory. A number, a code, a sequence of letters and digits on one of Harold's denial forms that had puzzled her at the time but been lost in the tsunami of grief. And then 2 days ago, Doc had said something during his weekly check on her arthritis. Something about the VA system, about codes and categories and the way benefits were processed. He'd mentioned a specific denial code, BF7732, said it had been flagged in an audit of VA benefits processing in Montana. Ruth had heard that code before. She was almost certain of it, almost certain she'd seen it on one of Harold's forms. So she opened the box. The papers smelled like thyme, musty, faintly chemical. The ink on some of them had faded, but the words were still legible. She spread them across her kitchen table after Lily went to bed. 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. The house quiet except for the refrigerator humming and the occasional car passing on Maple Street. She found it on the 7th document she examined. Harold's treatment authorization form dated March 15, 2010. Lung cancer treatment. Chemotherapy protocol. Stage 2 caught early enough that treatment had a reasonable chance of success. The form had been filled out by Harold's oncologist at the VA hospital in Billings. Everything in order. Everything approved. And then at the bottom, stamped in red ink that had faded to pink, a denial code. BF7732, benefits. Reduction, administrative review. Treatment deemed not cost-effective, pending budgetary reassessment. Harold had been denied treatment not because the treatment wouldn't work, not because his cancer was untreatable, but because someone somewhere in the system had decided that the money allocated for his care was needed elsewhere, had reclassified his treatment as non-essential, had signed a form that sentenced a 55-year-old man to die of a disease that could have been beaten. Ruth stared at that code, BF7732, felt it burn into her retinas, felt it sink into her bones with a weight that was different from grief. This was anger, clean, bright, clarifying anger, the kind that doesn't cloud your judgment but sharpens it, the kind that says, this was wrong and I need to know why. She didn't sleep that night. She went through every document in the box, found the code twice more, 2 additional denials, 2 more treatments that had been authorized and then revoked, 2 more chances at life that had been taken from Harold by a bureaucratic stamp. The next morning she arrived at the diner early. Griffin was already there wiping down the counters. He'd been arriving earlier and earlier, she noticed. 5:30 now instead of 5:45. Something in him had shifted since Emmett Dawson's visit. A quietness, a determination, the look of a pigeon who decided to earn something instead of expecting it. Morning Ruthie, morning Griff. She went through her opening routine, filled the dispensers, checked the shakers, flipped the sign, but her mind was elsewhere, on a code, on a number, on a dead husband in a system that had failed him. At 7:15, the brotherhood arrived. Ruth waited until they were settled at table 9. Until the coffee was poured and the orders were taken and the morning ritual was complete. Then she pulled Doc aside. "Colton, I need to ask you something. Anything, Ruthie. That code you mentioned. BF7732. I found it on Harold's records. 3 times." Doc's face changed. The easy warmth of a Thursday morning breakfast shifted into something else. Something professional. Something alert. "Show me." Ruth pulled the documents from her bag. She'd made copies at the library the night before. Fed quarters into the machine while the librarian pretended not to notice the tears on her face. Doc studied the forms, his eyes narrowing. His medic's training kicking in, reading the clinical language, parsing the bureaucratic codes, translating the alphabet soup of government healthcare into human terms. "Ruthie, this code. It's not standard VA procedure. I've never seen it used for treatment denial before. This is a budget reallocation code. It's used when funds are moved from one program to another, not for individual patient treatment decisions." "What does that mean?" "It means someone used a financial code to deny Harold's medical care. That's not how it works. That's not how it's supposed to work." Doc looked at the forms again, looked at Ruth, made a decision. "I'm going to make some calls. I know people at the VA in Billings, people I served with, people who will tell me the truth." Ruth nodded, felt something building in her chest, something that was bigger than grief, bigger than anger, something that felt like purpose. Over the next 2 weeks, while Griffin continued his education in humility and coffee pouring, Ruth Calloway quietly, methodically, stubbornly began investigating her husband's death. She didn't tell Griffin, didn't tell Bud, didn't tell Garrett. Not yet. This was hers. Harold was hers. The truth of what happened to him was hers to find. Doc made his calls, pulled records, talked to former colleagues at the VA. What he found made his hands shake, and Colton Webb's hands hadn't shaken since a firefight outside Kandahar in 2003. The BF7732 code had been applied to 412 veteran patients in Montana between 2008 and 2015. 412 veterans whose treatment had been authorized by their doctors and then denied by an administrative override that used a budget code instead of a medical code. 87 of those veterans had died. Harold Calloway was number 63. Ruth sat at her kitchen table with the evidence spread before her. It was 11 at night. Lily was asleep. The house was quiet. And Ruth Calloway, 62 years old waitress, grandmother widow, felt the shape of something monstrous forming in the documents before her. Someone had stolen money meant for veterans, had rerouted it through budget codes and administrative overrides, had turned medical care into a line item that could be erased with a stamp. 87 people had died. Her Harold had died. She didn't know who was responsible. Not yet. But she knew someone who might help her find out. The next morning, she called Nora Beckett. Nora was a journalist, worked for the Montana Tribune. 51 years old, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of reporter who still believed in shoe leather, in phone calls, and the slow grinding work of following a story wherever it led. She'd been investigating irregularities in Montana's VA healthcare system for 2 years. Had hit walls, dead ends, sources who went silent, records that disappeared. Ruth had seen Nora's name in the paper, had read her articles about VA underfunding with a distant interest that suddenly became very personal. They met at a coffee shop in Billings, not the diner. Ruth didn't want this conversation anywhere near Sycamore. Not yet. Nora looked at the documents, looked at Ruth, her journalist's instincts firing on all cylinders. "Where did you get these in my husband's files?" "He died in 2011. Lung cancer. V. A denied his treatment. And the BF7732 code. My friend found it. Former Army medic. He says it's a budget code, not a medical code. Says it shouldn't be on treatment authorization forms. It shouldn't be." Nora's voice was careful, measured. The voice of a woman who'd been working this story long enough to know that what Ruth had just handed her was either the break she'd been waiting for or a dead end dressed up as a lead. Mrs. Calloway, I need to be honest with you. I've been investigating via healthcare irregularities in Montana for 2 years. I've found patterns, suspicious fund transfers, budget codes that don't match standard procedure, but I haven't been able to connect them to a specific person or office. Ruth pulled out another sheet of paper. One she'd spent 3 nights compiling, a list, names and dates and denial codes. Doc had helped her compile it from records he'd obtained through his VA contacts. 412 veterans. Same code, same time period, 2008 to 2015. 87 of them are dead. Nora took the list. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. In those eyes, Ruth saw what she'd felt at her own kitchen table. The recognition that this wasn't a clerical error. This was a pattern. And patterns don't happen by accident. I need time. I need to verify all of this independently. How long? Weeks, maybe more. I have to be certain before I print anything. My husband has been dead for 14 years, Ms. Beckett. I've been waiting a long time already. They looked at each other. Two women, different worlds, same stubbornness, same refusal to let the truth stay buried just because it was inconvenient. I'll call you when I have something. Ruth drove back to Millbrook, arrived at the diner for her afternoon shift, tied her apron, poured coffee, smiled at customers, did the work. The same work she'd done for 31 years. But something was different now. Something behind her eyes had changed. The weariness was still there, but underneath it, burning like a pilot light that had been reignited after years of darkness, was purpose. She was going to find out who killed her husband, and she was not going to stop until she did. That night, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet and the documents were spread across her kitchen table like a map of something terrible, Ruth's phone rang. It was Garrett. Ruthie, the FBI came by my place too, asked about the Brotherhood's finances, asked about our relationship with you in the diner, asked if we'd threatened or coerced anyone. What did you tell them? The truth, that we're a veterans motorcycle club, that we eat breakfast at a diner, that we stood up for a friend when she was assaulted. That's all we did. Garrett's voice was calm. The voice of a man who'd been questioned before, who'd been in interrogation rooms and congressional hearings and military tribunals, who knew that the truth was the only weapon that never jammed. This is Ashford, Ruth said. He's trying to destroy us to protect himself. I know. There's something else, Garrett. Something I haven't told anyone except Doc and a reporter named Nora Beckett. She told him. About the shoebox, about BF 7732, about 412 veterans and 87 dead, and Harold being number 63. About the pattern she'd found and the questions she was asking and the door she'd opened that she couldn't close even if she wanted to. Garrett was silent for a long time. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind that tells you someone is rearranging everything they thought they knew. Ruthie, do you understand what you're saying? I'm saying someone stole money that was supposed to keep my husband alive. And I'm going to find out who. More silence. Then quiet and steady and full of something that sounded like pride. Then we're with you. Whatever you need. However long it takes. You're not doing this alone. Ruth hung up the phone, sat in her kitchen, looked at the documents, looked at Harold's picture on the mantel. A young man in uniform, smiling. Alive. Full of a future that someone had stolen from him. I'm coming for them, Harold. I'm going to find out the truth. The picture didn't answer. Pictures never do. But Ruth could have sworn the smile in that frame got a little wider. The next morning she arrived at the diner early. The next Thursday morning the FBI came. 2 men in dark suits stepped out of a black SUV and in the parking lot. Government plates, polished shoes, the kind of faces that don't give anything away because they've been trained not to. They walked into Sycamore Diner at 8:15 during the breakfast rush. Flash badges. We're looking for Garrett Holden. We have some questions about the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. Bud stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron, his Marine bearing coming through the way it always did when authority walked into his establishment uninvited. What kind of questions? The kind we can't discuss with you. Is Mr. Holden here? No. Comes in Thursdays usually, then we'll be back Thursday. In the meantime, we'll need access to your security footage. All of it, going back 3 months. Ruth emerged from the kitchen. Her face had gone pale, not from fear, from understanding. She knew what this was, knew who was behind it, knew with the certainty of a woman who'd spent 31 years reading people that Senator Lowell Ashford had made his move. "What's this about, ma'am? We're conducting an investigation. That's all I can say." They took the footage, left business cards, drove away. The diner's bell chimed as the door swung shut behind them, and for a moment the only sound was the coffee maker gurgling and the distant clatter of Bud's spatula against the griddle. Every regular in the diner had watched. Walter Finch, Mrs. Henderson, the truck drivers at the counter. They'd seen the badges, heard the questions, felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. And every one of them knew without being told that something bigger than a breakfast dispute was happening now. That the boy who'd spit on Ruth had a father with power, and power, when threatened, doesn't retreat. It attacks. Bud came out of the kitchen, stood beside Ruth, put his hand on her shoulder. Didn't say anything. Didn't have to. 77 years old, and the man still communicated more with silence than most people did with speeches. "We're going to be okay, Ruthie. Are we? We survived worse. Both of us. This ain't nothing but a senator throwing a tantrum. Let him throw it. We'll still be here when he's done." And Ruth Calloway, who'd finally started to feel safe, who'd finally started to believe that maybe things were getting better, who was finally on the trail of something that might explain why her husband had died, felt the ground shift beneath her feet, because she understood what this meant. Bud could lose his business license. She could lose her job. Garrett could lose his law license, the one he used to help veterans navigate the VA system. The Brotherhood could be labeled a criminal organization. Everything they'd built, everything they'd stood for, could be dismantled by a senator with a grudge and the power to weaponize federal law enforcement. Griffin appeared beside her. He'd heard everything, seen the badges, seen Ruth's face change. "This is my father, isn't it?" Ruth looked at him. This boy, this young man who'd been spitting on her a month ago and was now standing beside her with concern in his eyes and a dish towel in his hands. "Yes, I think it is." Griffin's jaw clenched. His hands tightened on the towel, and in his eyes Ruth saw something she hadn't expected. Not just guilt, not just shame, resolve. The look of a person who'd been given a chance to be better and was beginning to understand what that meant. "What do we do?" Ruth looked out the window of the diner, at the parking lot where the SUV had been, at the mountains beyond still snow-capped even in spring, at the road that led to her small house on Maple Street where Lily was drawing pictures of families, and Nathan was counting days in a cell, and Harold was 14 years gone, and the shoebox on the shelf had turned into something that could change everything. We keep going, we keep working, we keep looking for the truth. She tied her apron tighter, picked up the coffee pot, walked back out to the dining room where customers were waiting, and tables needed wiping, and the work of being human continued regardless of what storms were gathering on the horizon. Because that's what Ruth Calloway did. She showed up. She did the work. She kept going, even when the ground was shaking, especially when the ground was shaking. The call came on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after Ruth had first met Nora Beckett at that coffee shop in Billings. 3 weeks of waiting. 3 weeks of working shifts and pouring coffee and training Griffin and checking her phone every hour like a woman waiting for test results from a doctor who held her life in a manila folder. Nora's voice was different this time. Not careful, not measured, electric. "Mrs. Calloway, I need you to come to Billings tomorrow if you can. Bring Doc. Bring everything. You found something. I found everything." Ruth drove to Billings the next morning, borrowed Boone's truck because her Honda was still dead and the bus didn't run early enough. Colton rode with her documents in a manila envelope on his lap, both of them quiet for the 90-minute drive, through Montana landscape that looked like God had been practicing with a palette of green and gold and granite. Nora's office was small, cluttered, the walls covered with pinned documents and string connections, and the organized chaos of a journalist who'd been working a story for 2 years and had finally found its beating heart. She laid it out for them. The BF 7732 code had been created in 2008 by an administrative directive from the Office of the Senate Veterans Affairs Subcommittee. The directive authorized the reallocation of funds from individual treatment accounts to a general administrative fund during periods of budgetary constraint. On paper, it looked like routine government housekeeping. In practice, it was a siphon, a mechanism for moving money from one pocket to another without triggering the audits that normally accompanied federal fund transfers. The directive had been sponsored by one senator, Lowell Ashford, then a junior member of the subcommittee, rising fast, building a war chest for his first gubernatorial campaign, a campaign that would cost $12 million dollars and require creative fundraising that didn't leave fingerprints. Between 2008 and 2015, $4.2 million dollars had been rerouted from the Montana VFA Healthcare Fund through a series of budget codes and administrative transfers. The money moved through three shell organizations, two political action committees, and a charitable foundation that existed only on paper. It ended up in campaign accounts, personal investments, in an offshore holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. Nora showed them the paper trail, page by page, transfer by transfer. The forensic accounting that had taken her team 2 years to piece together, and which Ruth's shoebox documents had finally brought into focus. Here, 2009, $300,000 transferred from the Montana 5A Treatment Fund to something called the Western Veterans Support Initiative. Sounds legitimate, right? Except the Western Veterans Support Initiative has no office, no employees, no website, just a P.O. box in Helena and a bank account that forwards everything to a P.O.S. called Citizens for Montana Values. And Citizens for Montana Values, 92% of its expenditures went to Lowell Ashford's Senate campaign. Nora turned to another page. And here, 2011, the year your husband died. $600,000 moved out of the treatment fund in a single quarter. $600,000 that should have been paying for chemotherapy and radiation and the kind of care that keeps people alive. Instead, it bought television ads and polling data and a victory party at the Billings Grand Hotel. Doc's hands were clenched on the table. The hands of a medic who'd spent his life saving people. The hands of a man who was looking at evidence that a United States senator had let veterans die for campaign money. I treated some of these men. Some of them came to me after the VA turned them down. I did what I could, but I'm not an oncologist. I'm not a cardiologist. I couldn't give them what they needed. I told them to appeal, told them to fight the system, and the whole time the system was rigged against them. His voice broke on the last word. Colton Webb, who hadn't cried since a firefight in Kandahar, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. 412 veterans had their treatment denied or delayed because of those transfers. 87 of them died. Harold Calloway was number 63, diagnosed with stage 2 lung cancer in March of 2010. Treatment authorized. Treatment denied 6 weeks later under Code B F7732. By the time the denial was reversed on appeal 11 months later, the cancer had progressed to stage 4. Harold died 8 weeks after that. Ruth sat in Nora's office and read the documents. Every page, every number, every name. She read them the way a woman reads the autopsy report of someone she loved, with precision, with fury, with the terrible clarity that comes from finally seeing the shape of something you've been feeling in the dark for 14 years. Harold didn't die of cancer. Her voice was steady, the steadiest it had been in years. He died because Lowell Ashford needed money for a campaign. Yes. Nora's voice was quiet, respectful. The voice of a journalist who understood that behind every story were real people with real grief and real lives that had been shattered by the actions of powerful men in offices with good lighting and expensive furniture. I have enough to publish. But there's something else you should know. What I tried to get a comment from Senator Ashford's office, standard practice before publication. His press secretary didn't respond. But 2 hours after my inquiry, I received a call from the FBI field office in Helena. They want to meet with me. They want to know what I have. The same FBI that came to the diner. Different agents. Different division. This is the Public Corruption Unit. Mrs. Calloway, the FBI, is already investigating Ashford. They've been building a case for months. What you found, what Doc found, it's the piece they've been missing. The direct link between the budget codes and the patient outcomes. The evidence that money was stolen and people died because of it. Ruth looked at Doc. Doc looked at Ruth. 14 years of questions answered in a journalist's cluttered office in Billings, Montana. What happens now? Now you decide. I can publish what I have. The story runs. Public pressure builds. The FBI investigation accelerates. But if I publish, Ashford will know you're the source. His son works in your diner. His lawyers will come after you. His political machine will try to discredit you. It won't be easy. Or you take this directly to the FBI. Cooperate with their investigation. Let it play out through the legal system. Slower, quieter, but potentially more devastating in the long run. Ruth thought about Harold, about the way he'd held her hand in the hospital and told her not to worry, about the way his breathing had changed in those last days, shallow and wet and wrong, about the way Lily would never know her grandfather because a senator needed money for yard signs in television ads. She thought about 86 other families who'd lost someone the same way, 86 other women and men and children who'd stood in hospital corridors, in funeral homes, in cemeteries and wondered why. Why wasn't the treatment approved? Why did the system fail? Why did someone they loved have to die? Both, Ruth's voice was clear. We do both. You publish your story, I cooperate with the FBI, and I stand up in front of anyone who will listen and tell them what happened to Harold, what happened to all of them. Nora studied her, this 62-year-old waitress in worn shoes and a jacket that had been mended twice. This woman who poured coffee for a living and raised a granddaughter alone and carried 31 years of other people's orders on her shoulders. Are you sure this will change your life? My life changed 14 years ago when my husband died. I just didn't know why until now. She drove back to Millbrook, parked Boone's truck in his driveway, walked the 7 blocks to her house in the late afternoon light, went inside, made dinner for Lily, helped with homework, read a bedtime story, kissed her granddaughter's forehead and whispered, "I love you, star girl." Then she sat at the kitchen table and called Garrett Holden. It's time. 2 days later, Ruth Calloway stood on the steps of the Millbrook County Courthouse. Nora Beckett stood beside her. Doc stood behind her. The entire Iron Brotherhood stood with her. Bud Tennyson had closed the diner for the morning. Walter Finch was there. Mrs. Henderson. Half the town, it seemed, drawn by word of mouth and the understanding that something important was about to happen. And Griffin Ashford III was there. He'd come to Ruth the night before, showed up at her house at 9 o'clock, stood on her porch with his hands in his pockets and something in his eyes that looked like a decision that had already been made. Ruth had been putting Lily to bed. The little girl was already asleep, clutching a stuffed bear that had been Nathan's once a long time ago. Ruth opened the door, saw Griffin, saw his face, knew immediately why he'd come. "Come in. I'll make coffee." They sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd spread Harold's documents, the same table where she'd eaten 10,000 meals and paid 10,000 bills and cried 10,000 tears. The small, scarred, honest table that had held the weight of her entire life. "I know what you're doing tomorrow," Hal Garrett told me. He thought I should hear it from someone before it hit the news. And I want to be there. I want to stand with you." Ruth looked at him across the table. This boy who had spit on her. This young man who had learned to pour coffee and turn ketchup bottles and see people as human beings. This person who was in some terrible and beautiful way the reason she'd opened the shoebox. The reason she'd found the truth. Because his cruelty had cracked something open in her, and what came through the crack was not just pain, but purpose. "Griff, this is about your father. This will destroy him. I know, I've thought about it. I've thought about nothing else for 3 days. He's my father. I love him, or I love who I thought he was. But he let people die, Ruthie. He let your husband die, and then he sent the FBI after the people who stood up for you. He chose his career over human lives, and then he chose his career over the truth. I can't protect that. I won't protect that." His voice was steady, steadier than Ruth had ever heard it. The voice of a young man who'd been unmade and remade in 6 weeks of coffee and blisters and hard truth. "And you still want to be there?" Griffin looked at her. This woman who taught him how to pour coffee and turn a ketchup bottle and see people as people. This woman who'd been kind to him when kindness was the last thing he deserved. "My father stole money from veterans. People died. Your husband died. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know, but now I do. And you taught me something, Ruthie. You can't change the past. You can only change what you do next. This is what I'm doing next." Ruth reached out, touched his arm. A gesture she hadn't expected to make toward this boy, this young man who was becoming something she hadn't thought possible. Your father won't forgive you for this. I know. Are you sure? I'm sure. So they stood together on the courthouse steps, Ruth at the microphone, Griffin beside her, the brotherhood behind them, cameras and reporters in the machinery of accountability finally grinding to life. Ruth spoke first. Her voice didn't shake. Not anymore. My name is Ruth Calloway. For 31 years, I've been a waitress at Sycamore Diner in Millbrook, Montana. 14 years ago, my husband Harold died of lung cancer. He was a veteran. He served this country for 11 years. When he got sick, the VAA denied his treatment. They used a code, BF7732. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I was too busy burying my husband and raising my granddaughter and trying to survive. She paused, looked at the cameras, at the faces, at the town she'd lived in her entire adult life. But I know now, that code was part of a system created by Senator Lowell Ashford to steal money from the Veterans Affairs Healthcare Fund, $4.2 million, money that was supposed to pay for treatment for veterans like Harold. Instead, it went into campaign accounts and offshore investments. 412 veterans were denied care. 87 of them died. My husband was one of them. The crowd was silent, not the silence of a diner frozen by cruelty, a different silence. The silence of people hearing a truth they'd suspected but hadn't been able to name. The silence of recognition, of reckoning. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a waitress who raised a granddaughter and lost a husband and poured coffee for 31 years. But I know the difference between right and wrong. And what happened to Harold, what happened to all of them was wrong, and someone needs to answer for it. She stepped back. Griffin stepped forward. His hands were shaking. His voice would probably shake too, but Ruth had taught him something. You do the hard thing anyway. You show up even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. My name is Griffin Ashford III. I'm the son of Senator Lowell Ashford. 5 weeks ago, I spit in the face of Ruth Calloway because she brought me the wrong breakfast order. I did it because I've been raised my entire life to believe that people like her don't matter, that service workers are beneath me, that my family's money and power make me better than everyone else. His voice cracked. He pushed through. I was wrong about everything. The Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club didn't threaten me. They gave me an opportunity to learn what I should have been taught my whole life. That dignity matters. That work matters. That how you treat people when you have power over them tells you everything about your character. He held up the folder Nora had prepared. This is evidence that my father has been stealing from veterans for 7 years. I'm releasing all of it to the press today. I'm also cooperating fully with the FBI investigation. Not the investigation my father started to destroy the Iron Brotherhood. The real one. The one that should have happened years ago. And I'm doing this because Ruth Calloway taught me that you can't change the past. You can only change what you do next. This is what I'm doing next. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Nora Beckett took the microphone and began the methodical, devastating work of laying out evidence that would end a political career and begin a criminal prosecution. Ruth stepped away from the chaos, found a quiet spot near the courthouse wall, leaned against the stone and breathed. The stone was warm from the morning sun, solid, real. The way things are real when your life has just split into before and after and you're standing right at the seam. She could hear the reporters asking questions, could hear Nora's measured voice explaining the evidence, could hear Griffin answering questions with a steadiness that surprised her, could hear beneath all of it the sound of something changing. Not just for her, not just for Griffin or the Brotherhood or Millbrook, but for 412 families who'd been lied to, for 87 graves that finally had an explanation. She pulled Harold's photo from her purse, the small one she always carried, dog-eared from years of handling. Harold in his army dress greens, young, strong, full of the kind of certainty that comes from believing your country will take care of you the way you took care of it. I did it, Harold. I found out what happened, and I told them. I told everyone. The photo didn't answer, but Ruth swore the morning sun got a little warmer on her face. Garrett appeared beside her. You did it, Ruthie. We did it. All of us. How do you feel? Tired? scared, angry, relieved, all of it at once. Sounds about right? Is it going to be okay? I don't know, but it's going to be true, and sometimes that's enough. The next 72 hours were a storm. Senator Ashford's office issued a statement denying everything, called Ruth a disgruntled woman seeking attention, called Griffin a troubled young man suffering from delusions, blamed the Iron Brotherhood for brainwashing. But the evidence was solid. Bank records don't lie. Email trails don't lie. Budget codes stamped on the treatment files of dead veterans don't lie. By Friday afternoon, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit had shifted its investigation from the Brotherhood to the senator. By Saturday morning, two major newspapers had run front-page stories. By Sunday, Senator Lowell Ashford's chief of staff had resigned. The video surfaced on Monday, not the security footage from the diner, which had been seized by the FBI. Someone had been in the diner that morning 5 weeks ago with a phone. Someone had recorded the whole thing. Griffin spitting on Ruth, the Brotherhood standing up, the confrontation. It went viral in 6 hours. 8 million views by Tuesday morning, 15 million by Wednesday, and a GoFundMe appeared. Nobody knew who started it. The account was anonymous, but the goal was simple. Help Ruth Calloway. Help the families of the 87 veterans who died. It hit $50,000 in the first day, $200,000 by the end of the week. By the time it closed 2 weeks later, it had raised $1.8 million. Ruth sat at table 9 staring at the number on Bud's computer screen. Garrett beside her, Griffin across from her, Doc and Boone and Harlan and the rest of the Brotherhood filling the booth and the chairs they'd pulled up around it. This isn't real. Her voice broken, overwhelmed. The voice of a woman who'd been carrying heavy things for so long that the sudden lightness felt like falling. It's real, Ruthie. People saw what happened, saw you, saw your dignity, and they wanted to help. I don't deserve this. You deserve this more than anyone I've ever met. Garrett's voice, firm, certain. The voice of a man who'd spent 48 years waiting for this moment, waiting to do for someone else what nobody had done for his mother, waiting to prove that standing up mattered, that protecting people mattered, that the promise he'd made at 13 standing in an empty house with the smell of gun smoke in the air had been worth keeping. Ruth cried then, really cried. 31 years of holding it together finally breaking. Not from grief this time, not from exhaustion, from something else, from being seen, from being valued, from the overwhelming evidence that she had mattered all along even when the world had tried to convince her otherwise. The legal proceedings moved fast once they started. Senator Lowell Ashford was indicted on 17 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of federal funds. He resigned from the Senate 2 days after the indictment, pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, 8 years in federal prison, eligible for parole in 5. Ruth attended the sentencing, sat in the front row, wore her best dress, the one she'd bought for Harold's funeral, never worn again until now. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence was enough. The presence of a woman who'd been wronged and had found the truth and had stood up and demanded accountability. Behind her sat families of the other 86 veterans who died, wives and husbands and children and grandchildren who traveled from across Montana to be here, to sit in this courtroom and watch the man who'd stolen their loved ones' futures face consequences for it. Some of them had approached Ruth in the hallway before the hearing, shook her hand, thanked her, told her about their own heralds, their own shoeboxes, their own 14 years of wondering why. A woman named Gail Thornton from Bozeman had gripped Ruth's hand and said, "My husband Mitchell served 22 years. He died waiting for heart surgery the VA denied. I never knew why. Now I know. Thank you for finding out." Ruth had held Gail's hand and felt the weight of 87 families' grief pressing against her own. Felt it not as burden, but as purpose. As proof that what she'd done mattered. That the shoebox and the sleepless nights and the courage it took to stand on those courthouse steps had been worth it. Not just for Harold, for all of them. When they led Lowell Ashford out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked at Ruth. Just once. Their eyes met, and Ruth saw something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not defiance, shame. The shame of a man who had finally been made to see the human cost of his ambition. She didn't feel satisfaction, didn't feel victory, felt something quieter. something that felt like the end of a very long chapter in the beginning of one she hadn't written yet. Griffin was there too. Sat in the back row, watched his father sentenced, watched the door close behind him. Sat in the empty courtroom afterward the way people sit in churches after the service is over. Not praying exactly, just being. Ruth found him there. You wondering if it was worth it? Yeah. Was it? I don't know. I destroyed my father, my family, my whole life. No. Your father destroyed himself. You just stopped protecting him from the consequences. There's a difference, she sat beside him. They looked at the empty judge's bench together. Two people who'd started as enemies and become something neither of them had words for. Not friends exactly. Something deeper. Something forged into the fire of a shared reckoning. What happens now? Ruth smiled. Small, real. I'm retiring. Bud's selling the diner. I'm going to use some of that GoFundMe money to go back to school, finish my nursing degree, work at the VA hospital. Make sure what happened to Harold doesn't happen to anyone else. That's amazing. What about you? What happens to Griffin Ashford III now? He thought about it, really thought about it. I don't want to be Griffin Ashford III anymore. That guy was someone I'm ashamed of. I'm just Griff now. Just a kid who's trying to figure out how to be better than he was. Good. That's a good place to start. 6 months passed, the seasons turned, summer burned into autumn. Autumn froze into winter. Snow fell on Millbrook like forgiveness covering everything in white. Sycamore Diner closed its doors for the last time on a cold November morning. Bud had sold it to a developer. A chain restaurant was going in. Something generic and profitable, and completely soulless. But Bud was 77. He'd earned his retirement, earned his peace. The last breakfast service was an invitation only. Walter Finch, the regulars, the Iron Brotherhood, Ruth, Griffin. They sat at their usual tables, ate their usual orders, said goodbye to a place that had meant something. The morning light came through those wide windows the way it always had, warm and golden, catching the dust motes in the air and making them look like tiny stars. The jukebox played one last time. Patsy Cline, Crazy, the song that had been playing the day Ruth started working here in 1995. Bud had put a quarter in specially. Ruth walked through the empty diner after the last plate was cleared, ran her hand along the counter where she'd poured a million cups of coffee, touched the booth where the Brotherhood sat, stood at the spot near table 7 where Griffin had spit on her and where everything had changed. 31 years, more than half her life. This place had been her second home, her sanctuary, the place where she'd learned that work wasn't just labor. It was connection. It was community. It was the daily, invisible, exhausting, beautiful act of taking care of people. Goodbye, she whispered. Thank you for keeping me. Bud made the last pot of coffee himself, poured it into 11 cups, handed one to each person at table 9, kept one for himself. 40 years. 40 years of opening that door every morning and turning on that griddle and making that first pot of coffee. I never got rich, never got famous, but I made a place where people belonged, where a woman like Ruthie could spend 31 years and know she mattered, where 10 guys on motorcycles could have breakfast and feel like home. That's worth more than money. That's worth more than anything. He raised his cup. To Sycamore, to all of you, to the work that matters. They drank. And the coffee was terrible, the same burnt diner garbage it had always been. And it was perfect. After the last plate was washed and the last counter was wiped, Bud unlocked a storage room in the back and pulled out a brass plaque. Made this special. Figured it needed to go somewhere that matters. The plaque read Dolores's Place, reserved for Iron Brotherhood MC, protectors of dignity. This is for your mom Hammer, for what she meant, for what you built in her name. Garrett took the plaque, ran his fingers over the engraved letters. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, the eyes of a 13-year-old boy who'd made a promise in an empty house 48 years ago, the eyes of a 61-year-old man who'd kept it. Where should it go? Somewhere that needs protecting. Somewhere service workers need to know someone's watching. Somewhere people need to remember that dignity isn't negotiable. They installed it 3 days later at a small diner across town called Maple Street Grill, a place that reminded them of Sycamore, a place where the new owner understood what the plaque meant, what it represented. Table 9 became sacred space again, and every Thursday the Brotherhood returned, kept their ritual, kept their promise. Griffin worked there part-time while finishing the community college. He'd withdrawn from Georgetown, couldn't afford it anymore, didn't want it anymore. He was studying social work now, wanted to help people the way he'd been helped, lived in a small apartment he could barely afford, drove a used Honda because the Mercedes had been seized as part of his father's asset forfeiture, worked 40 hours a week on top of school because that's what you did when your trust fund evaporated and you had to learn how real people lived. It was hard, exhausting, sometimes humiliating. It was also the most honest thing he'd ever done. Ruth finished her nursing degree in the spring, graduated at the top of her class, 63 years old and walking across the stage to collect a diploma, while Lily cheered from the audience and the Brotherhood stood in the back row and clapped like she'd won the World Series. She went to work at the VA hospital in Billings, not just as a nurse, as an advocate. She created a patient review board that audited every treatment denial, made sure no code, no budget directive, no administrative override could be used to deny a veteran the care they had earned, made sure no family would sit in a hospital waiting room and wonder why the treatment was denied, made sure Harold's death meant something. The work was hard, different from waitressing, but hard in its own way. The paperwork was endless. The bureaucracy was thick. The system that had failed Harold was resistant to change the way all systems are resistant to change, with the passive stubbornness of institutions that prefer their own inertia to the discomfort of accountability. But Ruth was stubborn too. 31 years of stubborn. The kind of stubborn that gets up at 5 in the morning and pours coffee through arthritis and smiles at people who don't deserve smiling at. The kind that opens a shoebox after 14 years and doesn't stop until the truth is in the light. Within 6 months, her review board had identified and reversed 43 pending treatment denials. 43 veterans who got the care they needed because a 63-year-old former waitress refused to let the system fail them the way it had failed her husband. Doc helped, came to the hospital twice a week as a volunteer consultant, read files, flagged codes, taught the younger staff what to look for, what questions to ask, how to fight for their patients when the system pushed back. Garrett helped too, used his law practice to represent veterans whose benefits had been denied or delayed, filed appeals, wrote briefs, stood in hearing rooms, and made the case that every veteran deserved the care they'd been promised. The Brotherhood became something new, not just protectors of dignity in diners, protectors of dignity in the system. They drove veterans to appointments, helped families navigate paperwork, sat with widows while they filed appeals, showed up the way they always did, wherever showing up was needed. Nathan was released in January. Early parole, good behavior, 3 years sober. He came home to Millbrook on a Tuesday afternoon, thin and uncertain, and carrying a duffel bag with everything he owned. Ruth met him at the bus station. Lily stood beside her holding a drawing she'd made. A family, all of them together. The father included this time. Ruth saw her son step off that bus and felt time collapse. Saw the boy he'd been. The teenager who'd played football and dreamed of college, and somewhere along the way found pills that promised to make everything easier and made everything impossible instead. Saw the man he'd become in prison. Leaner, older. Eyes that carried knowledge of things a mother doesn't want her son to know. But his eyes were clear. That was the thing that hit Ruth first. His eyes were clear. Not the glassy distance of the drugs, not the hollow shame of the courtroom. Clear, present. The eyes of someone who'd done the work of looking at himself honestly and hadn't looked away. Hey, mama. Hey, baby. She held him, right there at the bus station. Held him the way she'd held him when he was small, when holding was enough to fix whatever was broken. It wasn't enough anymore. It never would be again. But it was a start. Nathan knelt down, looked at his daughter. 8 years of absence in his eyes. 8 years of birthdays missed. 8 years of drawings he'd received in the mail and taped to his cell wall and studied in the dark when the lights went out and the loneliness was loud enough to drown in. Hey, star girl. Lily studied him, this stranger who was her father. This man she'd been asking about for years. Then she held out the drawing. I made this for you. That's you? That's me. That's Grandma. We're at the diner. Nathan took the drawing, held it like it was made of glass. It's beautiful, baby girl. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Ruth watched them, her son and her granddaughter, the broken piece of her family finding its way back. Not fixed, not perfect, but together. And together was a start. They spent the first weeks carefully. Nathan in a halfway house in Millbrook, supervised visits with Lily, meetings with a counselor. The slow, fragile work of rebuilding trust that had been shattered by addiction and absence and the lies that addiction requires. Ruth drove him to his meetings, sat in the parking lot, waited. The way she'd waited for everything in her life, patiently, stubbornly, with the quiet certainty that showing up mattered even when you couldn't see the results. By March, Nathan had a job at the lumber mill. Entry level, hard work. The kind of work that makes your back ache and your hands rough and your sleep deep. He moved into a small apartment 2 streets over from Ruth's house, close enough to walk to dinner, close enough that Lily could ride her bike over on Saturday mornings and sit at his kitchen table and draw while he made pancakes. He wasn't the boy in the football photo on the mantle anymore. He was something else, something harder and softer at the same time. A man who'd broken himself and was putting the pieces back together one day at a time, one choice at a time, the same way his mother had been doing for 31 years. In April, Griffin graduated community college, top of his class, full scholarship to State University for his bachelor's degree. The ceremony was held in the high school gymnasium because Millbrook didn't have a convention center. Folding chairs, a podium with a microphone that squeaked. The kind of graduation that doesn't make the news, but changes lives. The whole brotherhood came. Ruth, Bud, Walter Finch, Nathan and Lily. Doc brought his wife. Harlan wore his clerical collar for the occasion. They filled 2 rows of folding chairs, and when the dean called Griffin's name, when he walked across that makeshift stage in his cap and gown, they stood and cheered like he'd won the lottery. Maybe he had. Maybe the real lottery wasn't money or privilege or a senator for a father. Maybe it was this: people who showed up, people who believed in you, people who'd seen you at your absolute worst and chose to stay. No one from his blood family was there. His mother hadn't called. His father couldn't call. But the family he'd built filled 2 rows, and that was more than enough. On a warm day in May, nearly a year after that morning at Sycamore Diner, Ruth stood at Arlington National Cemetery in front of a headstone. Harold Joseph Calloway, Sergeant, United States Army, 1954 to 2011. Beloved husband and father. She visited once a month, always brought flowers, white roses, Harold's favorite. Always spent an hour talking to a man who couldn't hear her anymore but maybe felt her presence anyway. Griffin stood beside her. He'd asked to come. She'd said yes. I never got to meet him, but I'm sorry. Sorry for what my father did. Sorry that Harold didn't get the care he deserved. I know. And Harold would have liked you, Griff. The you that you are now. He believed in second chances. Believed people could change if they worked at it. She placed the flowers on the grave. You know what the hardest part is? Not the anger. I processed that. It's the what ifs. What if he'd gotten treatment? What if we'd had 10 more years, 20? What if Lily had gotten to know her grandfather? I can't give you those years back. I can't fix what my father broke. But I can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That's what I'm going to do. Spend my life making sure veterans get what they deserve. Ruth looked at him. This young man who'd been a monster and was becoming something better. Not perfect. Still learning. Still stumbling, but trying, always trying. That's all any of us can do, Griff. Show up. Try on. Make tomorrow a little better than today. They walked back to the car together, the spring sun warm on their shoulders, the cemetery quiet except for the wind through the trees and the distant sound of taps playing somewhere for someone else who'd served and fallen. That evening, Garrett called Ruth. Got something for the kid. Can you bring him Thursday? What is it you'll see? Thursday morning, the Brotherhood at table 9. Ruth in the booth beside Garrett. Griffin arriving for his shift, tying his apron, pouring the first cup of coffee with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it long enough for it to feel natural. Garrett waved him over. Got something for you. He pulled out a leather vest. Black, well-worn, the kind that told stories. On the back was a patch, not the Iron Brotherhood colors, something different, a hand extended in help. The words beneath protector in training. You've earned this, not full membership. That takes years, but you've shown you understand what we're about, what we stand for. You're one of us now, Griff, long as you want to be. Griffin took the vest, felt the weight of it, the responsibility, the honor. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just keep being who you're becoming. Keep protecting people. Keep standing up. Keep learning. That's all we ask. Griffin put on the vest. It fit like it had been waiting for him, like he'd been walking toward it his entire life without knowing it. He looked around the table. At Boone, who taught him to fix things. At Colton, who taught him to stay calm. At Harlan, who taught him about repentance. At Garrett, who taught him about honor. At Flint and Odell and the others who'd shown him by quiet example what it meant to be a man worth respecting. And at Ruth, who taught him everything else, who taught him that dignity wasn't about what people gave you. It was about what you refused to surrender. That kindness wasn't weakness. That showing up mattered. That small things added up. That you can't change the past, but you can change what you do next. Thank you for all of it, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one. Everybody deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment. Garrett's voice. Quiet. Certain. The words his mother had said to him once a long time ago before the world took her away. Your worst moment brought you here. What you did with it after, that's what matters. The day stretched ahead. Tables to serve, coffee to pour, people to take care of. Simple work, honest work. Work that mattered because it served others. Griffin tied his apron over the vest, picked up a coffee pot, started his rounds. Outside, the Montana sun climbed higher. The town woke up. People started their days each carrying their own burdens, each deserving dignity, each deserving someone to stand up when standing was needed. And inside a small diner with a brass plaque on the wall, 10 men and 1 woman kept their promise. They showed up. They protected. They reminded the world that honor still existed if you looked for it, that people could change if given the chance, that what you did next mattered more than what you'd done before. And that dignity once defended rippled outward in ways you'd never see, but would matter forever. The coffee poured, the day began, the work continued. And Ruth Calloway, who had started this story as a tired woman in a small house on Maple Street, pouring cheap coffee in the dark before dawn, alone with her pain and her pills and her prayers, stood in the morning light of a new diner surrounded by people who loved her, and a future she'd built with her own stubborn, shaking, beautiful hands. She wasn't tired anymore. Or maybe she was. But it was a different kind of tired now. The kind that comes from doing something that matters. The kind that sleep can fix because the weight you carry during the day is shared. She poured Griffin a cup of coffee. He took it, drank it, smiled. Still terrible. Still terrible. They laughed. And in that laughter, in that small, ordinary moment between a woman who'd survived everything and a boy who was just beginning to learn what survival meant, the story found its ending. Not with perfect happiness, not with everything fixed, not with the kind of neat resolution that only exists in movies and fairy tales, in the stories people tell themselves when the truth is too complicated for a simple ending. But with people who'd been broken becoming whole, with dignity defended, with honor restored, with a shoebox full of documents that had become justice, with a brass plaque on a wall that carried a mother's name, with a granddaughter who drew families with all the pieces included now, with a son who was sober and working and learning to be a father, with a young man in a leather vest who was becoming someone worth becoming, with the promise that tomorrow when someone needed protecting, someone would be there. Not because they had to be, because they chose to be. That choice made all the difference. It always would.